Hi everyone! In today's episode, we are hosting Jeremyja Gordon, communication expert with more than 18 years of experience in nuclear energy and director of Fluent in energy. Jeremy, hi.
Hi Clara. Great to be with you.
Yeah, great to be with you as well. Where are you today and how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. I'm here in my small office in the suburbs of London, in the same town that I grew up.
Oh, so how's the weather?
Perfectly happy. It's hot.
It's hot.
We're going through a heat wave. They say it's going to be 40 degrees next week, which is a big deal for us. That hardly ever happens.
I hope you have good air conditioning.
No.
By the way, everybody who's here with us, this episode will be in English, so we hope that this is not a problem for you. But if it is, let us know. We will arrange some subtitles. And the topic of today's discussion is fear of nuclear energy. Jeremy, since we will be talking about fear, can I ask you, what are you the most afraid of? I mean, for me, it's spiders. I just, whenever I see a spider, I just get so nervous. So what is it for you?
I'm gonna say ghosts, because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts recently about ghost stories, and it seems that stuff does really happen. So I'm starting to think maybe there's something happening there. So yeah, ghosts for me at the moment.
Now I'm scared. I just, I don't want any ghosts here to join our podcasts. Okay, let's leave ghosts for a while and focus maybe on you. So in 2004, you started to write for Nuclear Engineering International magazine. Then you joined the industry with the World Nuclear Association. A year later, if I'm not mistaken, you created World Nuclear News, and in 2014 you joined the management team at WNA. I got a feeling that nuclear energy was always your biggest interest or focus. Was this your childhood dream, to end up in this industry, or how did this happen? Why nuclear energy, or why energy?
Well, it's random. It's quite random, and it was not my dream when I was growing up. But in another way, it quite fits for me, because I've always been quite good at explaining things and putting things together to make something new. And so sort of writing and being a journalist fits quite well for me, where I'm able to take a piece of information here and a piece of information there and something somebody told me somewhere else, and then, make some meaning out of it and then share it with other people. So yeah, I didn't intend to really work in nuclear energy. I was in my 20s and I needed a job, and there was a job working on a magazine about nuclear. I was curious about nuclear energy, same as anybody, but I didn't really know about it. So, I remember in my interview, in that first job on Nuclear Engineering International, the editor asked me, do I support nuclear energy or not? And I just said, well, I suppose it's okay if it's done properly. And so, yeah, okay. But then, which is what most people say really. But after working on the magazine for a while, I began to realize, yeah, actually it is okay. It is done properly. So I began to realize that we actually need kind of more nuclear energy and not less. And that's kind of put me on the path to wanting to share more information about nuclear and to fill in the kind of information gaps that people have.
That's actually great, because at first you were you weren't pro-nuclear, you just couldn't decide, right? And then after a while, when you became fluent in energy, you decided this is a way to go, right? So okay, now we can say that you are an expert in this field. But for example, I didn't study nuclear engineering, or I don't have enough knowledge about this topic. So how was it with you? How long did it take for you to, just understand the basics of it, the basic concepts? Or do you have any tips or tricks how we can be more fluent in energy?
Well, I have been doing this for a long time. I hesitate to say that I'm an expert because it's such a big subject. Nuclear is such a big subject, and energy itself is even bigger. And there's so much complicated stuff in there, which I really do not understand. But what I would recommend to people is to try to get good at recognizing what you do understand from what you don't. And when you meet something that you don't understand, the way to figure it out is, you research and so on, but you can talk to people. And if you find the right person who can explain things to you, then, well, you don't really become an expert, but at least you'll know, the surface level of more things. So I think in my time, I've built up surface level knowledge of lots of parts, and also that awareness of these areas I don't know. So I leave those alone.
Better not to dive into that, right?
Yeah, I can't say anything for sure about that. I've got to walk away from that. So, but I mean, I was lucky because I was working on the magazine Nuclear Engineering International. So every month we're producing news and articles about what's happening at the different power plants around the world, what all the companies are doing. So in the course of those 2 years, I'd seen a bit of everything. I'd read or written about every single country and all the different issues. So
yeah, you cannot.
So I kind of.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you probably cannot write about something if you don't understand it, right? So maybe you were somehow forced to understand, and maybe it just became a habit.
That's it. I could have said the same thing. I can't really write about something unless I understand it, at least to a certain kind of level. So that's a great way to get involved. If you want to learn any subject, start reading and writing about it. Anyone can start blogging or anything like that. It's a good way to learn. Yeah.
So also podcasts like this, right, are a way to learn or understand something.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So today's topic is fear of nuclear. But first I would like to go back in time and maybe explain some other history or a term, radiation, not the term per se, but everything started when radiation was actually discovered. Would you agree? So what would you maybe say are the first starts of nuclear industry? When did it all start?
Well, yeah, it's a long story. It goes back into the late 1800s when radiation was discovered, basically. So, I mean, radiation is a form of atomic energy. So radiation is literally energy radiating out of an atom and traveling through space. So it had always been there. It's a natural phenomenon, but it's invisible, and on Earth it's very weak. So it had been around people naturally for all these millions of years, thousands of years, and hundreds of years as we began to kind of develop science. We had no idea it was there until this one day when the scientist Henri Becquerel discovered that if he left a piece of uranium next to a photographic plate, and a photographic plate basically detects light, doesn't it? Detects light in the camera, and it sort of detected some kind of rays that were coming from his uranium. It's like, wow, what's that? So that's how they discovered it. So people were really, really excited by that, a completely new kind of energy, a new kind of light that you can't see. Things began to get really, really exciting. There's a huge burst in science around that.
So around radiation, right? Wasn't there a thing that people thought that radiation makes you younger, something like that?
All sorts of things like that. People didn't really know what to make of it. There's a lot of interesting things in this. I mean, as radiation is emitted from one element, one chemical element, it becomes another element. So one thing changes into another, and people immediately began to think, well, this is almost like a kind of magic. It's turning one thing into another. And people sort of thought, well, that's a little bit like dying and being reborn. So the idea that this was somehow connected to life was there at a really early stage. People began to think that you could turn lead into gold. You could create a city using radiation that like everything's made of gold. Like people could perhaps live forever because it can give them new life. All these kind of wild ideas that science was accelerating in such a quick way, it could create like an incredible new future. So, I mean, people like to make money. And so some people came up with some interesting products with radiation in them, like kind of medical supplements with thorium and radium in them, which like face creams that ladies would put on at night. Things to put into your bath water to make it radioactive, as if that would kind of renew your skin or something. None of these were really a very good idea, to be honest. But it lets you know how people sort of thought about radiation. They thought it was magic, really.
So like very huge hype around it, right? But what was it, or when was it that this changed? So was there a specific event, or what was? I mean, there wasn't a hype around radiation. I mean, there isn't anymore. So when did this change?
Yeah, there's still a little bit of hype around it because people still go to. There are some health spas that are set up underground in sort of caves.
Okay.
And people believe that the radon and radiation in those areas, radon spas they're called, will kind of rejuvenate you. I don't know about that, but yeah, some of it does live on. But I think most of these like radiation related health supplements were just shown to be nonsense, really. They don't do anything. And in fact, some people did get ill from drinking radium salts. It's not really a surprise. I mean, it is radioactive. It can damage you. So that kind of was proven to be a bit of a false promise.
And what happened next? Like, for example, we know that like we built, or I think that there was a writer, Wells, I think that he wrote about atomic bombs, right? So this was this the first mention of atomic bombs, or about bombs that could, destroy humanity? Because eventually atomic bombs were created. How was that?
Well, I mean, yes, I find this kind of history really fascinating because progress in science was accelerating so fast at that time that the world was going from a time when an educated person could roughly know and understand all the things around them, but it was accelerating so fast around that time that wasn't really true anymore. And so some of the fears and ideas that we used to associate with magicians and witches and supernatural things like that, some of that began to be transferred onto science and scientists and things like radiation. And that's when the other idea that you could create a beautiful city of the future. These are kind of science fiction ideas now. But that's when science fiction was actually born. And one of the very first science fiction writers was H.G. Wells. And in his book, The World Set Free, he came up with the idea of an atomic bomb. He was the first one to use that phrase.
Oh, he was the first one.
He was the first one. And in his idea, an atomic bomb would be kind of like a grenade that you would drop from a plane, and then it lands in the city and just give off energy for years and years. So almost like kind of, just set everything around it on fire, almost like creating a volcano in your enemy city. And he wrote a story where, this technology comes along and it changes the world. So he's very kind of prophetic at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, because eventually we as a humanity used or dropped atomic bombs, right?
We did indeed. Yeah.
His idea came to life, actually, right?
A lot of these ideas kind of come together. And so so scientists actually began to be seen as potentially, you know, a problem, that they might create something that they couldn't control, and they might change the world much more than they could imagine. They might unleash a force that got away from them. One of the first nuclear scientists, one of the key nuclear scientists, was Ernest Rutherford, and he said that some fool in a laboratory might blow up the world. And people say that he was joking, but he did say it. So that shows that even he was thinking, one of the top scientists of the time, even he was thinking, like, actually science is getting like out there now. We're not really sure what's going to happen next. H.G. Wells came along with his idea, and then, as you said, like, suddenly the world saw real atomic bombs used in Japan, at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the world was like really seriously shocked by that. I mean, we know about them now, but in their development, they were completely secret, and then suddenly revealed with this like absolutely devastating power. So the world was truly, truly shocked by that revelation. So people began to think, like, well, actually, maybe it's true. Maybe they did create something so powerful that it could even destroy the world. It actually becomes a legitimate question that a normal person, sensible person would ask, like, is this going too far? Can we kill ourselves with this stuff?
Yeah, maybe this idea was even stronger because of all the hype or optimism that was built like years before around this this technology, right?
It's like layers of this stuff. It kind of compounds.
So could we perhaps say that there are like three main ideas of nuclear industry? Like in the first year or the first phase would be like when in the years that radium was discovered. So when this all hype was created around radiation, around radium, and then in the second phase, for example, we could say that scientists or experts discovered the ultimate destruction, like a way how the world could be destroyed. Maybe not just the whole world, but parts of society. And then eventually in the third phase, those doomsday machines were actually built, created and used. So did I get that right? So could we like divide this whole concept into three like main ideas or stages?
Yeah, I think that's about right. And those three ideas kind of interlock, and they really all came together in the, let's say, the 1970s, and they've been brewing since the 1890s. So that's like 80 years of history, like a whole human lifetime. That story that brought us from an exciting scientific discovery to, this real fear that, we might abuse this technology so badly.
And this fear is still present somehow, right? But I'm wondering why, because, for example, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, coal and oil energy system, or even gas, are responsible for more deaths per 1,000 terawatt hours produced energy. And yet it is nuclear energy that is associated with deaths and seen as a threat to humanity. Why? I mean, I do understand a bit why, but why do you think it is so? Because it cannot be just history, right?
Well, if these ideas are like 100 years old, they don't go away that quickly. But it's also that people process risks in different ways. And a daily kind of risk is seen in a different way to a kind of a one-off, occasional historic risk that might only happen once in the world, or once in a decade, or once in a lifetime.
Yeah, like driving a car is seen as less dangerous, right, than living next to a nuclear power plant.
Absolutely, yeah. And people see a nuclear accident as such a big thing that it potentially affects the whole world. It's partly because of history, and it's partly because of the way the media treats it, which is also because of that history. So that's how people think about nuclear, whereas the sort of continuous negative effects of fossil fuels, which are with us every day and, you know, kills 7 million people every year, that's just kind of a drip that nobody pays any attention to. So, you know, it's like you mentioned that driving can be risky. We all know that air travel is safer than driving, but people are not really afraid of driving, are afraid of air travel. And telling them that air travel is statistically safer, it doesn't make anybody any less afraid of flying, right? It doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, because that's funny that you mentioned flying, you know, because yesterday I was we were chatting on Instagram community about what is their biggest fear, right? And quite a lot of them said that they are afraid of flying, you know. And can you imagine saying someone that he or she is afraid of driving a car? I mean, it's just an answer that you really don't expect, but we somehow expect for someone to say, yeah, I'm afraid of flying. So yeah, this is it's brilliant how our mind works, right? Especially when it comes to fear.
Yeah, and it's because we see these big incidents like a plane crash, or it's completely different as from the sort of small accidents which will, you know, it's terrible when they kill 1, 2, 3 people. We see that in a completely different way to a plane crash which kills 1, 200 people.
Yeah.
And another really big aspect is that when you're driving, you've actually got control. You've got the steering wheel in your hands, and it's your decision to go to the shops or to drive wherever you're going. Whereas in a plane, you're sitting in the back, you can't even see the pilot. You might hear them every now and then, and you're just kind of trusting that they're doing it right, and you've got no concept of how the plane really works. You know, well, obviously there are wings and jet engines, but are they maintained properly? I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
So where you don't have that aspect of control, it's obviously people are more aware of that risk. They process it and raise it at a much higher level in their mind. So the same thing sort of applies to nuclear, because a nuclear power plant in the next valley, or, you know, further along the river, is kind of a mysterious thing that people don't normally know about. They don't have any control. They just have to trust. So it kind of is unfortunate the way it triggers that.
Good point, yeah. Because
whereas gas is something they do understand because they use that to cook.
True. So maybe understanding more nuclear would actually make us feel safer, right? Even more safer.
Yeah, and I mean, well, part of my mission now, you sort of talked a little bit about my career. I worked in industry at the World Nuclear Association. Now I'm an independent consultant, and well, my mission, if I would describe it that way, is to help the nuclear industry bring nuclear kind of down to earth, to reduce that mysterious aspect, to help it to show the people that are running these power plants are ordinary people. They're not weird scientists doing crazy risks. They do know what they're doing. They're not doing weird experiments. And actually, at a power plant, I don't want to be rude, but, you know, it's kind of boring. It's pretty ordinary. It's just like, you know, routine operation and nothing to get too excited about. And it's important because the industry is very small. And like we just said, most people never go to a power plant.
Of course.
They don't even know someone who works there. It's kind of it's a very small industry in reality. So it means the industry has to reach out constantly or it will just get forgotten. And if it gets forgotten, then all that mythology takes over again.
I mean, we will then, if we don't communicate about it, right, we will just hear about it when an accident happens, right?
Yeah, when bad news comes along, everyone will start yelling about it. If they're not well informed, or they don't have some interaction with people who are well informed, you know, well, it's not gonna help. It's not going to help the nuclear industry to do its best. It's not going to get the best chance. And if it doesn't get the best chance, the energy system doesn't get the best chance. Climate change doesn't get the best chance. So.
And by the way, when we talk about fear and accident, we probably can't ignore Fukushima and Chernobyl accidents. So by the time that Fukushima happened in 2011, you have already reported about some bigger earthquakes in Japan, right? And about the fact that nuclear reactors, Japanese nuclear reactors, sailed through these problems very safely. Why was it different with Fukushima? I mean, how did you report about it? What was the situation there? Or maybe how did you how did a Japanese report about it?
So I was working on World Nuclear News at the time. I was the editor. So every day we would figure out what was going on in the world, try to understand it, try to research it, talk to some people to make sure we understood it, and then explain it in plain English and get that out to people. So, that's what we did every day. We did the same during Fukushima, but, it kind of evolved a little bit differently in the end. Because normally a natural disaster in a way would be like good news. Earthquake or, any kind of hurricane or tornado or anywhere around the world, we'd find out like what's going on, what happened to the nuclear plants near there, and you find they were absolutely fine. There's it's no problem. So you can write a very short story saying the nuclear plant was completely fine, and we wanted to kind of build up some evidence, that nuclear plants are not affected by these kind of issues. But it was immediately different from the start. For Fukushima on that day, because the sheer size of the earthquake and the huge tsunami wave that we saw on TV, this was like a big deal. So we researched as quickly as possible, what's the status of these power plants? And we hear that they are in a bad situation, but not in an accident situation yet. Kind of trying to find more information, but nothing much is coming from Japan. But at the moment we really realized that the true seriousness of it is when we heard that the emergency diesel generators hadn't started up to power the safety systems. And so that's sometimes happened before at a nuclear plant. They're supposed to all start normally about 8 big diesel generators, something like that, number like 8. And they're supposed to start up automatically. Sometimes one of them doesn't start. That's happened before. That's not supposed to happen. It's an interesting safety issue. You have to work on that. But it's not an emergency for the plant. And now we hear at this power plant, none of the diesel generators are working. And we're looking at each other like, what? How can none of them work? This is crazy. And then we realize the tsunami. Oh my God, the tsunami has taken them all out. And so at that point, we kind of visualizing it's the middle of the night in Japan. These guys working at the plant surrounded by mud and debris in the dark, trying to reconnect stuff and get these things working again. Oh, right. Okay. So we our focus kind of got a lot more serious. Then we kind of worked into kind of an emergency mode. But in terms of reporting, what we did is publish something as quick as possible and then update that story regularly. You've got to acknowledge it's a serious event and be honest about the depth of the seriousness there. And we used contacts in the industry that are closer to the incident. So we had some contacts in Japan at the Japan Atomic Industry Forum, which is like the trade association in Japan. So we talked to them and they told us what they understood, and then we turned that into plain English and sent that out. That was a kind of our approach.
Sorry to interrupt, but one of the questions that we got before our episode today was if something like this could happen again. I know you're not an expert in all the fields, but what would you say?
Well, I think one of the big lessons of the Fukushima accident was never say never, right? Never say never. Yeah. So the Japanese authorities, they thought they knew how big the tsunami wave could possibly be. They were wrong. A bigger one came And in that scenario, their safety systems didn't work properly. They found themselves in a big problem. And it's partly because they thought it'll never actually happen. So the big lesson for the world is never say never. And around the world, the safety regulators in basically every country did a kind of a exercise where they put their power plants, they did this exercise on paper, they didn't really do it, but they analyzed what are the breaking points, what are all the potential weak spots in our safety and security systems, and when they fail, what's then the limit, and what's then the limit, and basically on paper test the power plants to destruction. And then you go back and you harden up all those aspects so that was called a stress test, and every power plant in the world did that. So you, as I said, you never say never, but you need to appreciate that these things have been extremely thoroughly analyzed and prepared, and even if the things do go wrong, they've got double, triple ways of operating them from remote sites. So you don't even have to have crew sort of operating at the plant. They can operate it from somewhere else. Backup supplies of water, endless backups.
Interesting, right? Because Japan is now still considering to restart even more power plants. Okay, this is probably also due to their, country's dependency on energy import from Russia. But then again, they experienced this accident very closely. I mean, it was part of their, it is part of their history, country's history, but they are still very pro-nuclear. How did they achieve that? I mean, are people... are people not afraid of nuclear even though they experienced this accident? How did this happen? I mean, how was the public image built, or how did maybe experts build trust?
Well, that's a very good question. Japan built its nuclear power plants in the first place for reasons of energy security, because it's an island. It's a series of islands. It's not really connected to anybody else it could import electricity from. It doesn't have its own oil and gas. It doesn't really have its own coal. So if it, during industrialization and through, massive growth in the middle of the last century, the 60s, 70s and 80s, nuclear power is something that enabled Japan to be what it is today. Yeah, because they could import uranium, which is very cheap and has no other uses. And then using technology and manufacturing, which they're very good at, they could make that into their own power plants that they can design. They can make that into electricity, which is a high value technological product. So that's fantastic for their economy. And that really helped them to become this science, technology, power, and do all their manufacturing quite cheaply with good low rates for electricity. All the car manufacturing, all the semiconductors, and all that stuff they make. So the nuclear power is fundamental to that. So I think all along, Japanese industry and Japanese government understood that. Like they knew nuclear power is the backbone of Japan's energy system, and that's not really going to change. So Fukushima being what it is, they still need to cope with that and get back to using it. The problem that the Japanese power companies have had in restarting their reactors is that because they didn't get their safety analysis right in the first place, there's a whole new set of regulation, which is actually very extreme, a very difficult system. So they've ended up with that, and that's been extremely long and difficult for them to prove to the regulator that they're safe enough, which you do need to do, but it's very difficult for them. And they didn't communicate well enough with the people local to the plant, who are actually the ones affected by a safety issue if one happens, and one did happen. So people in Japan living near a nuclear plant, you can't really tell them, it'll never happen again. It did happen down the road to other people like them. So, that trust takes a long time to be rebuilt. But the economic
it seems that they accepted this as a society. I mean, that's how I see it. They accepted it. Okay, this happened. We learned something from it. Now it's time to go on, to move on. And this is something that it's the only true way to go. I don't know. Would you agree?
I would agree. That's basically the position of Japan as a country, and they have these issues with actually achieving it sometimes with the regulation. They have wrinkles in their system which are very difficult to overcome, but they're still committed to using nuclear. That is the policy. They want it to be. I can't remember exactly. 30% of their electricity, because the fundamental reason to use it is still true. They still need the energy security. Yeah. And basically the same kind of thing applies to Ukraine, which went through the Chernobyl accident.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Chernobyl for a bit. Okay. I think that everybody watched a series about Chernobyl that was released recently, right? So we do know some, let's say, facts, but maybe they are not facts because you should always be informed from many different sources, not just TV series, right? But what was the case at Chernobyl? What happened there? What was the biggest problem? What do you think? I mean, not concerning the accident, but how was this? I mean, the Soviets tried to cover it up, right?
I see. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of cultural issues, really. There were just briefly, very briefly, regarding the accident, the sort of technological issues which led to that plant being unsafe. Had social sort of cultural roots, and the way it was operated, it was also down to culture of the Soviet Union. So that's really the ultimate root cause of the whole thing. It was a terrible, unnecessary industrial accident, terrible for the people who were at the plant at the time and the firefighters who ran in to deal with it, and awful for the people who were around who had to deal with how to evacuate, and they literally have a higher cancer risk because of that. But I mean, why I think Chernobyl is kind of legendary, isn't it? And I think that's because we could get back to those stereotypes about nuclear, those ideas we were talking about, because basically the people running the plant, the scientists, they weren't actually in control. They were using forces they couldn't really control properly, and the way the accident actually happened, there was actually an explosion. It wasn't a nuclear explosion, it was a hydrogen steam explosion. So it wasn't like an atomic bomb. But when something explodes, that's a pretty clear sign that you were not in control. So there's no denying it, right? And the Soviet system did try to cover it up. So they showed they couldn't actually be trusted. That was true. So those trigger those old ideas around,
especially because the whole
nuclear.
World knew, right, that they are trying to cover it up, right? Or at least they got a sense.
Everybody knows, and I mean, even once the world had discovered there'd been an accident, and obviously it's serious, there was still like very, very little information about what's really going on. And so obviously the worst ideas just fill that space, right? Yeah. And I believe that's what resulted in Chernobyl being the huge kind of legend that it is, which is far greater in scale than the accident actually was. Which I said, it's a really, really bad industrial accident, but it's not a global catastrophe. But when you leave that space of information, the worst ideas fill that. And that's kind of what we've got, these lingering ideas around still. And that's why TV makers like to, make a series about Chernobyl every few years. They know that people are fascinated by it.
Yeah, of course. Okay, but what about Ukraine today? I mean, if I'm not mistaken, they even helped Germany with energy resources. Am I right?
So Ukraine is about 50% nuclear powered. About half of its electricity comes from 4 nuclear plants which were built under Soviet times, and they've since improved and developed a little bit in the period of independence that they need to stay in now. So I mean, for a long time, a policy of Ukrainian governments has been to reduce their dependency on Russia for gas and for anything else. And nuclear is a big part of that. So they've maintained and invested a really strong nuclear sector, which does half of their power. So during the current war, some early action in Europe was to connect Ukraine to the electricity grid that covers most of Western Europe and Central Europe. So there's a big grid, and it's about 30 countries, and all their electricity is kind of synchronized, so they can trade between themselves and support one another in a big market. So Ukraine wasn't part of that. So they made some technical changes soon into the war to connect the Ukrainian grid. So the idea was that, let's support Ukraine. We'll sell them electricity. And that's not what's actually happened in the end, because the whole of Europe is in an energy crisis. But Ukraine is using less electricity than normal, right? Because this economy is in dead trouble during this war. So they've got surplus nuclear electricity they don't even need. So they're actually sending it to Europe right now.
Oh my God.
So that's supporting this big grid of which Germany is part. So in a way, Ukraine is using its nuclear power to support Germany, which is closing its nuclear power and refuses to keep its last few reactors, even though it would help its neighbors.
Do you think now that this energy crisis, or maybe even war in Ukraine, will change public opinion about nuclear energy? I mean, I don't know if we are currently more pro than against, but would you say that there will be some shifts in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely already is. Just because this energy crisis, the shortage of gas, the crazy prices that we're all paying, it means energy is discussed like on the front page of the newspaper, once a week, and politicians talking about it all the time. And so people are figuring out, gas is no good. Apparently coal is no good, because that's also kind of comes from Russia. Yeah. People like renewables, sure. But that doesn't mean there isn't space for nuclear to be part of the solution. And nuclear is genuinely part of the solution because its energy security is so high. I mean, as I said, like for Japan, it imports a little bit of uranium, and then it can, using manufacturing and by investing in its economy, it can then support its electricity system through nuclear energy. And even if you're not making everything yourself, like Japan can, nuclear fuel is so energy dense that a power plant can easily store 2 or 3 years supply at the site. So some fluctuations in the gas price, who cares? No problem, right?
Well, and also another thing is that European Union recently voted to count natural gas and nuclear energy as green energy, right? So that is also like people started to realize that this is a way to go, right, with nuclear. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people have been trying to communicate the value of nuclear for in terms of climate change and sustainable development. A lot of work has gone on to get the evidence and to present it and to make the case. A lot of people are out there kind of arguing for nuclear, and it's finally working. It's getting recognized as being sustainable. So there's a big fight about this taxonomy in the European Union because they've literally got a list. The taxonomy is a list of what's sustainable and what's not.
And if you're on that list, you can probably get better financing terms for your projects, which is super important for nuclear, because if you want to build a new nuclear power plant, as much as half of the cost is the loan to build the plant. So if you can get a better deal on that loan, well, the cost of everything comes down. So if nuclear can get on that, well, as it is on that now, that stands to make nuclear projects in the European Union quite a lot cheaper, as well as investments in keeping the current plants going longer. Kind of engineering investments cost hundreds of millions to keep them going for an extra few years. That should also get cheaper. So it's annoying that nuclear was on the same boat as gas, because they've got nothing in common. But that's a political issue, because France and other countries wanted nuclear in, Germany wanted gas in, and so they stuck them together to make a kind of a compromise, which is kind of an ugly kind of compromise.
Yeah, but we gotta go step by step, right?
Yeah. I mean, and in all that process, to prove that nuclear was sustainable, the Joint Research Centre of the European Union, so this independent scientific body, it did a super extensive study on the sustainability of nuclear energy. Yeah, it looks at absolutely everything from digging up the uranium to dealing with the waste and everything in the middle, and it concluded that nuclear is every bit as sustainable as wind and solar and other stuff that's already in the taxonomy. So I believe that study is bulletproof. So it's really good to kind of have that on record to go with this decision.
Okay. Maybe my final question would be, what do you think are the challenges that we as a society will have to face in the future when it comes to energy?
Well, I just think energy is going to be a bigger part of our lives. It's becoming an everyday topic, not just because of this current energy crisis, but people are aware of climate change. Everybody knows like it's real. We have to change the way we're using energy. Energy is a big part of that, the solution to that. And everywhere we look, we're going to see it more and more. It's not going to be just flick a switch and you don't know what happens. People know that it's like wind and solar are going to be visible. People are going to be talking about nuclear more. We're going to be changing our cars to electric ones. We're going to be changing our cookers, changing our heating away from gas. So energy is going to be like a really live topic. That shouldn't be a challenge. That should be good. And I want the nuclear industry to kind of just get involved in that and show how it's part of the solution. And if we get it right, the transition to sort of clean and sustainable electricity sources, then those will be the issues, like spending some money and changing the way we do things. If we get it wrong, then governments will have to start like taxing us like crazy, curtailing our energy supply, rationing energy and things like that. So I really hope that we take the first route actively. Otherwise we'll end up with the other route, which will be
we don't want that. We don't want that. Okay, Jeremy, do you maybe have like any closing thoughts for us, suggestions, ideas, topics that maybe we can share or dive into next time? I mean, when it comes to nuclear energy, I think that like the main focus or the main question or the most frequently asked question is safety, So this is something that maybe we talked about today, and the fear, of course. Then costs. So how much does it cost, to build a nuclear power plant? This is something that people are always interested in. So this is something that we will leave maybe for the next time.
Cost is interesting. Where does the money actually go? Where does it go in the economy when you build a nuclear power plant? So that means, like, what are the jobs? What's the manufacturing? What's the benefit of that goes round in circles? And how much might be loans to the bank? Nobody wants to be paying to the bank. They've got enough money already. And how can we cut that with the with the taxonomy? So that part of economics is pretty interesting, I think. That's where the economics of nuclear power touches human beings working in and around the power plant. It links to them enriching their lives, and that's what we want to do, isn't it? So maybe that's pretty good.
I mean, this will be also our focus in the next episode, probably. But for today, I think that we all agree that you were a wonderful host, a wonderful guest. So I truly hope that we will have opportunity to host you again, maybe to discuss some other topics. It was really nice talking to you. I wish you very, very nice day. And I hope that this podcast or that this episode will reach to as many people as possible, so that they hear that nuclear is safe, that we are not afraid of nuclear energy, and that we support it, right?
Yeah, well, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Clara. Brilliant to be here. I'm really fascinated by some of these issues, and it kind of drives me to try to help the industry communicate better, get around this, so that we can have a good crack at a clean, green, sustainable future. Right?
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Well, Jeremy, thank you again for your time, and I hope to see you again soon, right?
Yeah, okay. See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Many thanks also to you, to our listeners who were here with us. I hope that you learned something today, and see you next time.